Who secretly saved this struggling old age home? You won't believe the truth. Like and subscribe for more incredible stories of hidden kindness. The walls of Serenity Pines whispered tales of better days. Once, perhaps, its faded grandeur had spoken of comfort, of a gentle decline into twilight years. But time, like a relentless tide, had eroded its charm, leaving behind a structure that sighed with every gust of wind, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin, its windows clouded with the grime of neglect and the tears of unspoken sorrows. Serenity Pines was an old-age home, a final refuge for those whose families had either moved on, or simply forgotten. And now, it was teetering on the brink of collapse, not from structural weakness alone, but from the crushing weight of financial despair. The handful of staff, led by the weary but kind-hearted Mrs. Gable, did their best. They stretched every penny, mended every tear, and offered smiles that often masked their own anxieties. They knew the residents by name, by their stories, by the unique cadence of their coughs in the quiet of the night. But kindness couldn't pay the overdue electricity bills, nor could it mend the leaky roof that dripped a mournful rhythm into buckets strategically placed in the hallways during rainy seasons. Appeals to local businesses and wealthy patrons had yielded little more than polite refusals or token gestures that barely scratched the surface of their mounting debt. Desperation was a constant, unwelcome guest at Serenity Pines. Among the staff was Sarah, a young woman barely out of her teens, her heart still soft and idealistic. She'd taken the job as a caregiver part-time, intending it to be a stepping stone, but the residents, with their fragile hands and eyes that held oceans of untold stories, had woven their way into her soul. She felt their discomfort acutely, the chill that seeped through thin blankets, the blandness of meals dictated by an ever-shrinking budget, the quiet resignation that hung heavy in the air. She often stayed late, reading to those whose eyesight had failed, or simply listening, offering the precious gift of her presence. Then, one bleak Tuesday morning, something extraordinary happened. Tucked beneath the front door, as if placed by a fleeting shadow, was a plain brown envelope. Inside, Mrs. Gable found a stack of crisp banknotes, a sum significant enough to cover the most pressing utility bills and even allow for a slightly more nourishing menu for the week. There was no note, no name, no indication of its origin. Just the money, lying there like a silent miracle. A wave of disbelief, followed by cautious joy, rippled through Serenity Pines. "An angel must have heard our prayers," whispered Mrs. Henderson, a resident whose faith was as steadfast as her trembling hands. The staff were equally bewildered and grateful. They made discreet inquiries, hoping to identify their benefactor, to offer their profound thanks. But no one came forward. The donor remained an enigma. The following month, on the very same Tuesday, another envelope appeared. And the month after that. And the one after that. Each time, the same plain brown envelope, the same life-saving sum of money, left anonymously before dawn. It became a lifeline, a whispered secret that breathed hope back into the tired lungs of Serenity Pines. The leaky roof was patched, warmer blankets were purchased, and occasionally, there were even small treats, a fruit tart, a special Sunday roast, that brought fleeting smiles to weathered faces. The identity of the Angel of Serenity Pines, as the residents lovingly dubbed their mysterious benefactor, became a topic of hushed speculation. Was it a reclusive millionaire, touched by a sudden pang of conscience? A former resident's grateful child, wishing to repay a kindness? Or perhaps, as old Mr. Peterson insisted with a twinkle in his eye, a lottery winner sharing their newfound fortune? The theories were many, but the truth remained tantalizingly out of reach. Sarah, more than anyone, was consumed by a gentle curiosity. It wasn't just about knowing, it was about wanting to express the immense gratitude that welled up inside her every time she saw the tangible difference the money made. She yearned to tell this anonymous angel how their kindness was not just about funds, but about restoring dignity, about reminding these forgotten souls that they were still seen, still valued. One chilly evening, as the first Tuesday of the month approached, Sarah made a decision. She would keep vigil. She had to know. After her shift ended and the last of the residents had settled into their restless sleep, she bundled herself in a thick coat and found a discreet spot near the entrance, hidden in the deep shadows of an overgrown rose bush that had long forgotten how to bloom. The hours crawled by, each one colder and longer than the last. The old building groaned around her, the wind whistled through the ill-fitting window frames, and the distant city lights cast an eerie, orange glow on the low-hanging clouds. Doubt began to creep in. Was this foolish? What if the donor chose a different time, a different method? What if they sensed her presence and stayed away? She shivered, as much from the cold as from a growing sense of unease. Just as the first hint of pre-dawn gray began to lighten the eastern sky, a faint sound pricked her ears. A shuffling, hesitant sound, almost imperceptible against the sighing of the wind. Her heart leaped into her throat. She strained her eyes, peering through the gloom. A figure emerged from the dimly lit corridor of the residence wing. Slow, achingly slow, as if every step was an immense effort. The figure was stooped, leaning heavily on a worn wooden cane. Sarah's breath caught. This wasn't the swift, purposeful stride of a mysterious benefactor. This was the laborious movement of someone burdened by age and infirmity. As the figure drew closer to the front door, fumbling with something in their hand, the weak light from a nearby street lamp momentarily illuminated their face. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a cry of utter disbelief. It was Mrs. Eleanor Vance. Mrs. Vance, the quietest, most unassuming resident of Serenity Pines. A woman who rarely spoke, who spent her days in a faded armchair by the window, her gaze lost in some distant memory. A woman who seemed so frail, so dependent, that Sarah had often helped her with the simplest of tasks, like buttoning her cardigan or cutting her food. Mrs. Vance, whose only known income was a meager state pension, barely enough for her own small comforts. Sarah watched, paralyzed by shock, as Mrs. Vance, with trembling fingers, slid a familiar brown envelope under the door. Then, with the same agonizing slowness, she turned and began her arduous journey back towards her room, unaware that she had been observed. Tears streamed down Sarah's face, tears of astonishment, of humility, of an emotion so profound it had no name. The angel of Serenity Pines wasn't a wealthy stranger. It was one of their own, a woman who possessed almost nothing, yet gave everything she could. Later that morning, her heart still thrumming with a mixture of awe and tenderness, Sarah sought out Mrs. Vance. She found her in her usual spot, gazing out the window. "Mrs. Vance," Sarah began softly, her voice thick with emotion. "May I speak with you for a moment?" The old woman turned her head slowly, her pale blue eyes, usually distant, now holding a flicker of surprise, perhaps even apprehension. Sarah knelt beside her chair. "Mrs. Vance, I saw you this morning. By the front door." A faint blush crept up Mrs. Vance's wrinkled neck. She looked down at her gnarled hands, clasped tightly in her lap. For a long moment, there was only silence, broken by the distant clatter of breakfast trays. Then, in a voice so low it was almost a whisper, Mrs. Vance spoke. I didn't want anyone to know. But, why, Mrs. Vance? And how?" Sarah's voice was gentle, filled with an overwhelming need to understand. Mrs. Vance took a shaky breath. "My pension. It's not much, dear. But I don't need much anymore. A cup of tea, a warm bed. That's enough for me." She paused, then continued, her gaze drifting back to the window. "Years ago, before I came here, I knew what it was like to feel forgotten, to feel like a burden. I remember the cold, the hunger, not just for food, but for kindness." Her eyes met Sarah's, and in their depths, Sarah saw not frailty, but an incredible, quiet strength. When I saw how things were here, the struggles, I couldn't just sit by. I saved a little each month. It wasn't much to begin with, but it grew. I I wanted the others here to feel a little warmth, a little comfort. To know that someone cares. Even if they didn't know who. Sarah could no longer hold back her tears. She reached out and gently took Mrs. Vance's hand, its skin as thin and delicate as old parchment. "Oh, Mrs. Vance," she choked out, You are the most generous person I have ever known." The story of Mrs. Vance, the secret benefactor, spread through Serenity Pines like a gentle, warming sunrise. At first, there was stunned silence, then a wave of emotion that washed over residents and staff alike. Many wept openly. The idea that one of their own, someone who shared their hardships, had been making such a profound sacrifice was almost too much to comprehend. Mrs. Gable, her own eyes glistening, embraced Mrs. Vance, whispering words of gratitude that were echoed by every soul in that home. The residents, in their own ways, showed their appreciation. Mrs. Henderson knitted her a small, soft shawl. Mr. Peterson, who had a surprisingly good voice, sang her an old, sweet song. Even those who could barely move made an effort to offer a smile, a touch, a look of profound respect. The revelation did more than just identify the donor, it transformed Serenity Pines. Inspired by Mrs. Vance's selfless act, a new spirit of community and determination took root. Local newspapers picked up the story, and suddenly, the plight of Serenity Pines was no longer a forgotten issue. Donations, both large and small, began to pour in from individuals and businesses who had been touched by the tale of the old woman who gave her all. Volunteers offered their time and skills. The building began to see repairs, not just patches. The scent of fresh paint mingled with the aroma of better food. Mrs. Vance, uncomfortable with the sudden attention, remained her quiet self. But Sarah noticed a new light in her eyes, a subtle lift to her frail shoulders. She had not sought recognition, only the quiet satisfaction of making a difference. And in doing so, she had ignited a spark of compassion that spread far beyond the walls of Serenity Pines. Sarah often thought back to that cold, pre-dawn vigil. She had gone looking for a mysterious, powerful benefactor. Instead, she had found humanity in its purest, most unassuming form. She learned that true generosity isn't measured by the size of the gift, but by the depth of the sacrifice. And that sometimes, the greatest angels are not those with wings and halos, but those who walk quietly among us, their hearts filled with a love that asks for nothing in return, offering their own small flames to light up the darkest corners of the world. The legacy of Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the unseen angel of Serenity Pines, would live on, a testament to the enduring power of quiet kindness.